jump right into it. So, Captain Kirk, it'd be great if you could start us off with sort of telling us a little bit about who you are. And I know that after 32 years of being an active duty firefighter, you're now on to new things. So I'd love to hear about that.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks very much for having me. Yes, 32 years in the active duty firefighting, and in the last about 6 weeks, it's time to move on to new things. I'll be doing adjunct professorship with the University of Cincinnati, looking at next-gen smart technologies, and a number of other possibilities. Obviously, Darley, not to all your listeners, or viewers, has been a big partner to me, and I'm looking forward to doing more work with you and maybe some of the dozens of teams around the world I've been dialoguing with the last year or a few years, because we need to move the ball forward. Yeah,
that's right. And I speak on behalf of everyone else in this webinar that we thank you for all the trailblazing and innovation you're doing. And it's been really awesome to see everything from IoT to big data to VR, all these different subsets of technology, what you're doing to push it forward. And I think more so than ever right now, there's so much importance and attention that need to be put on how we're dealing with this current coronavirus crisis. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of really what brought us here today, with wanting to take some of the value in your brain and bring it to the world in terms of how we can share some of these best practices and share some of these issues with coronavirus. So we have some slides here that we'll pull up here, but kind of to start, wanted to get some of your perspective on what are some of the new ethical and privacy concerns as it pertains to how we're dealing with this coronavirus response, in particular as it pertains to first responders.
Sure. Well, to me, I've been watching the idea of digital ethics develop over the last number of years. And if we compare it maybe to bioethics, if we look back a few centuries, as much as doing an autopsy on someone who'd been lost was considered witchcraft. And then over the last few decades, then there were ideas about, well, what if we could take parts of someone who we've unfortunately lost and make something good happen out of it. As I'm sure we see in the scientific industry, we're doing with people who are immune to COVID. We might be able to use some of their antibodies. With digital ethics, we're just beginning in the first data revolution, or the fourth industrial revolution. What do we do with our data? What should be shared and what shouldn't? And there are a number of universities doing some work on, including University in Cincinnati. These are questions that are yet to be answered, but certainly if my location being known to enterprise teams working on tracing, for instance, was I close to a known COVID patient? Would I want to know? Well, I would want to know. And could we democratize that data? Take away the specifics of who it was, but notify people when they were close to a threat. And moving on from COVID, could it be a threat of an active shooter, an earthquake, flood, fire, other natural and man-made disasters? How do we use and protect how do we protect their privacy and their freedoms while using digital assets, machine learning, and AI to make their life better?
So is that currently being put into practice? I mean, is that, are there examples of taking my iPhone or a Samsung and, where you can actually have some data that's tied to my phone, and then how that can be taken and then recirculated to other people? Or, elaborate on that concept and what that means.
Well, and I have a slide I think maybe we'd see later talking about, I think it was the Singapore government who had developed an app and said, hey, please download the app and we'll notify you if you've been in close proximity. And certainly we should put time in there. If we are within 6 feet, maybe the 5 feet, there you go. Yeah. If we're in 5 or 4 or 3 feet of somebody for 1 or 2 seconds, well, there's a certain amount of exposure. If we're there in a closed room for half an hour, 3 or 4 or 5 days, maybe we'd want to know.
Yep.
And so this is something that certainly the ethics around it are a big are a hot topic. And could there be benefit to that? And,
Yeah.
and can we? How do we all work together and answer the questions and opt in or opt out for maximum privacy? But if we have maximum privacy, then we may not glean the benefit of apps that are being developed like this.
Yeah, and I know when I go to the airport, I'm happy to let TSA do whatever they want to me, and I think it's a great thing, to ensure security and safety. But I know with data security, it's a big thing with where do you draw the line in terms of not having too much oversight while also using the available data to keep our society safe. So, I guess I'd love to know some of your thoughts on what are the data that we're trying to capture that might be something that's useful, and what is that type of, like, is it some new hardware that's being used to capture this data, whether it's like thermal sensors or what type of new data is out there?
Yeah, the thermal, let me get to that in a sec, but I'm thinking about one of the enterprise teams that I've had some dialogue with that has, say, the location of several 100 million citizens around the world. And during the Camp Fire in California, where people were trapped in trying to escape, teams that have mapping technologies, they know where we are and effectively know what roads are open and what roads are not. And we need to open, to me, the pipeline of data exchange. While privacy and freedoms are incredibly important, they're inalienable rights in certain countries. The requisite right to life itself is so critical. So we had a slide on infrared. That's one of the things that there we go. Yeah. Okay. So the team at FLIR were kind enough to recently share some information with me about infrared scanning for elevated body temperatures. How does one use that? How do paramedics, how can they potentially use that on a single case basis? Or, like you said, when you go to the airport? Well, certainly airports are using infrared sensors. With that, I believe it was the FDA had there's an approval standard that I believe is plus or minus 3 degrees Celsius. And for the cameras that meet that requirement, it's quite close range. Well, we need to update, for COVID and so many other things, our standards around digital data systems and how they're transferred, and how do we help the majority. And again, by taking out the specifics around whose data it is, but that it's just data. For instance, based on CDC death rates, 8 per 1,000 annually in the U.S., we lose 7,000 people every day in our country. Before COVID, we lose more than 100 people a minute around the world. Well, that's nobody's name or age or location. That's just data. How do we strip personal information out and glean the information we need, and make it useful?
What's being done right now? I mean, is that something where I appreciate everything you said, but like, are there barriers that need to be overcome? Or I know that's a red tape bureaucracy nightmare, but is this something that we're making progress on, and who's working on trying to democratize that data?
Yeah, good questions. I think it's going to be an iterative process, just like bioethics and transplanting. It's going to continue to iterate. Fire hose was, I believe, first invented a coupled threaded fire hose in 1673. Still designing new fire hose today. One thing I wanted to mention is Casumas Fire, where I spent the last 25 years. I'm grateful to have been able to serve alongside my brothers and sisters. They just started a program that I think has been, let's just say, not only is it fresh now, maybe it should have been, or we would have wanted it going before, but ironically, COVID allowed it to advance quickly, where Dr. Mackey is our local county EMS director and works with the fire department closely and launched a mobile integrated health platform where previously we took 16,000 people to the hospital last year in the fire department on 20,000 calls. The protocol is they could only go to the hospital and we could only see them in their home. And it was firefighter, EMT, paramedics, and then we could transport to the hospital. But there needed to be more breadth within the system. And so now there'll be a physician's assistant, or there is a physician's assistant with a paramedic and going out and making patient contact, including and maybe not direct contact, but how do we use infrared in these circumstances? Interesting times. And the unsheltered community in our region and all regions who are not housed. These are folks that need medical care, and the overall greater communities need them to be looked after. So they're doing really good work there as expected.
That's great. And so is this type of, and I'll pull that back up. So I'm kind of messing with some of the different settings here, but is this type of mobile integrated health community paramedic model something that others can adopt, or, is that something that those best practices that can be shared, or, what else can we learn from what's happening in Consummus right now?
Yeah, and there's a number of teams that had started this over the last few years who have been heavily impacted by beds being unavailable in hospitals, which gratefully right now, because the communities took a rapid response to COVID, at least around here. Call volume is down. People are sheltering in their home. Hospitals have room. All surgery, elective surgeries and the like have been postponed. So there's space currently. But before, the system, sometimes an ambulance would have to wait some time to offload a patient. And what if they just needed 2 or 3 sutures? In a large system, in a big city, several communities have been launching these opportunities where a physician's assistant who has suture qualifications could go out and do a suture. Like we got rid of, if you will, house calls for doctors some years ago, and now maybe it's something that it is something that's being done now, because if the only other option is an ambulance to a hospital, we don't need that for some things. So
yeah, interesting. So it seems like that's a very tangible means of how we can change some of these practices and try and leverage the resources that we have and try and deploy it more effectively in the community to meet those gaps within the medical range. And it kind of tie that, which is great. And I want to expand on that later, but I want to kind of bring it back to, I know one technology partner of yours that you talk a lot about is Blue Force. And I kind of wanted to hear from you about what Blue Force is doing, kind of who's partnered with their network, and kind of just a little bit about how they're tied into the whole coronavirus response for first responders.
Yeah, yes, and I'd like to suggest folks look them up and see definitively what they're doing. But from what I do know about the team, and I'm grateful for their being partners with us, along with Zebra Technology Phone. And when I say us, I mean Consummus Fire. Those are my brothers and sisters, and I'll support them into perpetuity. But if first responders have a rugged phone with a platform like Blue Force, which is a software as a system, Internet of Things, encrypted fusion platform, then they can be utilizing the Internet of Things. They can be using body-worn sensors, heart rate monitors, thermal sensors, pulse oximetries, and integrate that encrypted in the cloud. First responder commanders could know where their personnel are. And then when we get into the COVID crisis, it's worth going to see some of what the their teams have been working on together with a variety of other partners to fuse these data streams together. For me, it inspires what's possible in the next wildfire, right? It's windy today, humidity's down. California fire season is due to start in the next few weeks. How's that going to be impacted by COVID? And then how do we use tools like this to really move the ball forward in the innovative and iterative process of smart community risk reduction? And thanks for all, what you've done at smartfirefighting.com and all the podcasts you've done. I'm grateful to be, here on your webinar. I'm looking forward to doing more. I'd love to have maybe some of these team members on a future one that they can tell us more about what they're doing with their analytics, and because we need the gritty hard work of first responders is going to stay perpetual. How do we support that and effectively then provide that risk reduction to those they serve?
Yeah, and as I'm looking at the slide, and you just mentioned a lot of great examples, and especially how we can take lessons learned and tie it into wildfire response. And here I'm looking at the zebra Blue Forest slide, and I'm interested to know, kind of speaking you to technologists or you to the general market, like what would you say to technologists out there or different entrepreneurs that have some ideas, and what would you say to them on how they could tweak or enhance their technology to tie into the Blue Forest zebra, or what could they be thinking about to tweak their services to have it really bring value to those in need of some of these immediate coronavirus solutions?
Sure. You're at that. That's a big one. But for me, what I keep thinking of in the size of the first responder market and the firefighters, EMT, paramedics, and the LEO, law enforcement officer community, while relatively small scale market, if you will. I think for firefighters, there's about one firefighter per 1,500 souls on the planet. It's a small market that serves all 7.5 billion souls. And when we talk about Internet of Things, I believe we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 billion connected devices, maybe 25 billion, with a projection of maybe 40 billion devices in the next 2 years. And my devices, I've got 3 or 4 devices that are connected to untold platforms. I don't even know every platform I'm connected to right now. How do we, so to those enterprise teams and those startups and the technologists, to me, it's to build it for everyone else. The 7.5 billion, there's your market. Ruggedize it, make it secure, encrypted, ubiquitous and agnostic, and so that it can serve first responders, and those that I was sworn to protect. Because my phone was as valuable as any piece of equipment on the fire engine, maybe more. I have 2,500 contacts in the phone. Those other people, having contact with them, being able to I remember I was a holdout. I didn't want to move from a flip phone. Who wants email on their phone? Oh, well, wasn't that a short decade? So now I want everything available so that I can pick and choose. And I want to make it available to build it for everyone else. It's not per se for the first responders. It's what if everyone was enabled with knowing their exit pathways in a fire or a violent event? What if they had a 3D floor plan instead of simple maps, which have been very effective back when we had rideshare, which have been apparently shut down for the last couple of weeks. When we were doing rideshare, it's a highly effective tool. And rideshare companies had my personal information, my credit card number, my cell phone number, and I could, and it was very effective for me. How do we give the interior of hotels to people so they know route to take in the eventual fires that will come, regardless of COVID.
Yeah. So those are a lot of good examples in terms of sort of what it seems like, what needs to happen, what is possible, what we know is possible, but maybe isn't accessible information for various reasons. I know we had talked about this before, but what are some other, maybe not just hardware, but some other software or AI tools that are available to first responders right now? Are there any that you're aware of that are out there?
Well, and there's a couple things on that, Kevin. One is I like to, what people say, well, Kirk, nobody's doing that yet. Well, they might not be doing that yet, but conceptually, it's possible today. So how do we take this really, really challenging, and my heart's out to those who are intimately affected by the challenges around COVID and who have lost loved ones. How do we turn that tragedy into an opportunity? And for instance, you've done, I don't know how many podcasts you've done, 65 podcasts, 70?
100.
100. Okay. And now, blink. And now it's webinar. So there is an opportunity. And so how do we leverage that? And how do we take advantage of these challenges to move the ball? And I'll get to the ML and AI in a moment, just knowing that we have to move it, right? With more than 100 people a minute around the world being lost to various causes, 35,000 a year in the US to vehicle accidents, time to move the digital innovation ball. And so with machine learning and AI, where's the problem is one of the ones. And I think we had Esri, you have an Esri slide. So Esri is incredibly impressive to me. Jack Dangerman, super nice guy, hosted a couple of technology events at his facility in Southern California, or down San Bernardino County, over the last few years. And he's all about where's the problem? And one of the biggest challenges for first responders is just knowing where the issue is. And so when we look at the COVID crisis, we have to know where the problem is. And then those who are doing the computer modeling, which we all know are flawed from the start because they don't have enough data, but to get and the algorithm's not perfect and there's too many variables. But does it start to tell us something? As we gain more data, then the model will be more accurate. So those are that's a sight to see. And then they're working closely with Johns Hopkins to track where things are. Do you have a slide on Johns Hopkins? Yeah. So that's a very effective map for seeing where is, and that's a few days old, but where things are in a given region and the in a state or country. So I like the thought of using AI to help us to determine. We hear the leaders talking about, well, when are we going to open and how much are we going to open? The economy, the restaurants, travel, and it's going to be interesting. It's going to be iterative. And thanks for bringing this slide up. One of the machine vision is one of the AI things that I'm really interested in. And I don't know this team, but when I saw what they were doing about just seeing the spacing of individuals, machine vision is used for weapon detection. It's right, obviously facial recognition. When we get back to ethics, how do we must protect privacies and freedoms, and if there's some value in just seeing how closely or how densely a population is, or how spread apart they are, it's clearly there's web cameras out in the community. Would I want to be notified if I was to, just give me a little heads up, hey, watch your social distancing. Not everybody's going to want to opt in on that one, but I was glad to see that somebody is thinking on what's next. When we're out in a public space and we're in plain view, people are taking pictures and video camera, and how do we use that for the masses to make a difference?
Yeah. And as you were talking here, there's a couple of great questions coming in. We got 3 right now, and I think 2 that are specific to what you're talking about, some of this data tracking and recirculation. One from Antoinette Rehack, and the other one from Kingston Chinkamham. But the first one is asking around if you're using blockchain to track and secure data. And this kind of ties into the other question of, are some of the big companies like Google and Twitter and Facebook, how are they tied into this and using data that is available, or, where are those fine lines of if they're using too much or using not enough of the data?
Yeah, good questions. And to me, I don't know if there's a program yet for a PhD in digital ethics, but there's going to be soon if there's not. We need to ask the professors of that, and then the next generation of students is to help us answer the questions, and more importantly, because when we think of the first autopsies done on humans, were done in hiding, and so we asked those early, the colleagues asked those early innovators, who were, some of them were sadly put to death because of their curiosity and how the human body works. Their answers changed over generations, and these answers will change for us, I think, over the next few weeks, months, and years. As for blockchain, I have not personally been using it. I have a few colleagues that could speak to that. As we look at cryptocurrency, the thought of blockchain and machine learning is critical to is a critical possibility for keeping the community safe.
That's great. Yeah, and I know that it's a quickly moving field, especially with data democratization and security and aspects of blockchain. So Antoinette Rehack had mentioned Michael again at Drexel is doing some interesting work, so might want to connect with him and kind of learn more about some of the work he's doing. And I know you and I, Kirk, had created some other questions which I want to get to, but our friend from Virtual CRR, Brent Faulkner, had a great question. And you and I had talked about this before, is the best way to stop a fire is to prevent it. And I know there's a lot going on in terms of not only the response, but I would love to know your thoughts on how we're using technology to help with the prevention and the education as it pertains to this current situation.
Yeah, well, thanks for Brent for getting on the call with us. And obviously, there's been a lot being pushed out from CDC, Johns Hopkins, about the physical distancing. I like the term physical as opposed to social, because, right, thanks for inviting me to the show, because we're going to be in a new way of social intimacy. It may be from a physically remote location, but it's all about being human. How do we maintain our human connectivity and that separates us to a degree from those I don't want to say non-emotional, because my dog is emotional, but you're with me. There's a lot I've seen and not enough, to Brent's question. I'll have to reach out to him, and what will we do on that? To me, it's how do we maybe it's a GoPro, let's get together with them and partner as they've been a partner for some time already. But on the COVID response, how do we do a 360 video to teach in VR? Right? How do we immediately be using 360 VR cameras and equipment for first responder training? For what does it look like when you have a critical COVID patient in an ambulance? What are your risk factors? How should you be doing that? And then educating the public. Let's put together a 360 video content on best practices for those who are sheltering in home, and maybe they have someone in the home who's gotten sick, but they're not critical. They're moderately ill. They're in the home. They're doing what they can to isolate them in a bedroom. But where's the education with that? How do we push out that? Let's do that 360 video that we can push off on. And then I think I've got, and we can be in a cardboard viewer, right?
All we need.
Let's
360 video camera, cardboard headsets.
Brett, watch for my email.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree. I think this is such an easy way to create content, whether it's Insta360, GoPro, and using these $3 to $5 cardboard headsets and giving us the opportunity to really teach widespread different concepts. And, that doesn't have to just be COVID response. I think it's really looking at education and prevention in ways that's effective surveys, effective knowledge distribution, and finding ways to create this content at scale and distribute it at scale. So I agree 100% on that. And to your point earlier, I love the concept of it's not social distancing, it's physical distancing, because we are humans. I am an emotional animal and I need human interaction. And if anything, this type of conversation is so critical for me because I'd be going crazy if I couldn't see other people. So luckily I can socially interact while physically distancing.
Yeah. And to your point, thank you, Kevin. And to your point on the best way to fight fires to prevent it, there's just that I don't know how many hundreds of kindergartners I got to see come through the firehouse and teach them about stop, drop, and roll, and that lives matches for grown-ups, and that when you hear the funny sounds of a firefighter, that to call out because they're there to help. But we're able now, not only are we able now, we're mandated literally to get that message out in a new way to those that we serve. It's all about those maybe we've never met and may never meet. The smoke detector may have saved more lives than all firefighters combined because it notifies people when they get out of the house. Oh, that's a great tool. Let's update the way we do public education to prevent all the different things. Vehicle accidents. A great program called Every 15 Minutes where high school kids get together and with local first responders and do a training program about what it looks like when somebody has been out on a Friday night consuming adult beverages, crashes their car, and one of their friends is lost. And it's a dramatization. Helicopter comes, very effective. One of our guys, Joe Gardino, has done like thousands and thousands of high school students over the last 25 years. Very effective. What if we capture that in 360 video for the person? Well, and this year, June, that's around the corner. My guess is not happening. So how do we put that together and then teach all teenage drivers about the dangers associated and how to stay alive?
Yeah. And thank you for that context. And I'd like to continue that as it pertains to prevention, but also response. And it seems like there's no shortage of technology solutions, no shortage of different ideas, but I'd love to hear about the way to turn these ideas into action. And I know especially for COVID right now, there's a couple different grants and funding resources, but you had mentioned the NIST Chariot Challenge. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what's going on with that?
Yeah, well, a little bit, Kevin. So NIST has two laboratories, my understanding. I think that's Maryland and then Baltimore, which I was grateful to have been to help design a 3D mapping challenge. I was there a couple of years ago, and I'm fairly close with the team. They put out the challenge called the Chariot Challenge, and there's two parts to it. And Chariot, it's the IoT, is how do we bring together the Internet of Things for first responders and those they serve, and the other component is an AR, or augmented reality challenge. And there's a great video, and I see you've got the link down there. People can find it. Very polished and well done about the possible, where the Ironman firefighter, to have, or first responder, to have data streams. And my belief is the form factors are going to be less bulky and more effective and more integrated, and not Ironman anytime soon, but let's use our imagination to move the ball. So NIST PSCR, and that's a Public Safety Communication Research Group, which is under the Department of Commerce in Boulder, has put together this challenge. And it's really inspiring to see their team working on this. And there's a few friends that maybe we'll see what we can do together to put in for the challenge. And I think everybody should look at this as indication of what's coming.
Yeah. And actually kind of on this sort of moonshot ideas, we have another good question from Kingston. And, I don't know anything about this, but maybe you do. And your response, interested in your thoughts. But his question is, what's the possibility of robotic medicine? And his other context is, robots can perform routine medical work for contagious patients without replacing or eliminating healthcare workers to free up medical staff, so they can spend more time on direct care, as well as reduce the risk of exposure. Seems like a big question with a lot of ideas and maybe some things to consider or worry about. What are your thoughts to that?
Yeah, I think robotics have a big potential for all of us. From relatively simple robots, squishy robots out of Berkeley allows you to drop a payload, say from a drone, airborne robot, that and protects it. It could fall to the ground and protect a phone, an infrared sensor, a thermometer, medical supplies in a difficult to access location, all the way up to, I've seen remote surgeries with robotics arms, if memory serves, of suturing a grape skin together from a remote location. And so robotics and augmented reality surgeons from remote locations are very inspiring. But the obvious airborne, or the obvious robot, I think that is making great strides already, is the UAV platform, to the airborne thing. How do we put that out in front of first responders? So on a wildland fire, for instance, been on a number of calls where it's a long drive. I'd really like to know what's going on out there. And the reporting part here, the RP has indicated by painting a picture with words on a phone, with may not have decent connectivity, of what it is. But especially in a wildland fire setting, they spread very quickly. What if we could put an airborne asset over that fire in short order and use machine vision and cloud computing and fog and edge computing and run fire model in nearly real time? But where's the fire going? How do we use this team out of San Diego and this Technosilva, and there's some teams doing some really good work where, right, what about NASA satellites using machine vision to identify a hotspot early on and put an airborne robotic asset in the air in short order? One of the teams I'm talking to is interested in doing just that, where potentially we suppress it while it's less than 100 square feet versus 100,000 acres. Literally, we had a fire a few years ago up in the hills. It ran 14 miles overnight.
Wow!
Get them while they're early, or get them early while they're small. Yeah.
And so you just alluded to some of the other players that are doing some interesting stuff with all technology, but you being such a great networker and connector, I'd love to know, who are some other people that we should be keeping an eye on as it pertains to, obviously the issue of coronavirus, but also just in general, and maybe who might be the next victims for our virtual smart firefighting webinar chats.
Yeah, thank us or blame us, because maybe Brent is going to get an invitation. So on the small scale, Caleb Holt, near the top of the list, and he has, I would look him up at Make Safe Tech or simply Safe Tech. Caleb's got some funding opportunities and some suggestions from some recent webinars that are very impressive. Kelly Cohen, University of Cincinnati. I hope that he would join us on future webinar. He's aerospace mechanical engineering background, does a lot in ML and AI, and very interested in making a global difference, if you will. Stefan Truthen at HHP Berlin. He and I consider each other the crazy equivalents between America and Europe, that we are very interested in rapid advancement of that's made possible through technology. It's not because of the technology, it's not for the technology, it's always for those we've never met and may never meet, and our brothers and sisters who have the opportunity to serve, who are using legacy two-way communication. The land mobile radio system, as that's our communication model, is overdue to be replaced in more than a single step process. James Mullins, Deakin University and flame trainer. Boy, wouldn't it be good to get Sam Kosman from Quake Technologies? He's kind of busy with C. And then what are the teams at FDIC, at Intershoots, ABCO, Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology? Keep watching NIST. And then, of course, the enterprise teams, augmented reality enterprise teams, and the big groups, the telecommunication teams that are right. Everybody's being affected by this right now. So there's a lot of good that is going to come from the challenges that we're all being faced with right now.
That's good. And thank you for all that. And those are connections where if you are listening and you're interested in learning more, myself or Kirk can happily make those introductions for you if you've got if you want to have a conversation. So we're happy to do that. I got another question from Brent. He is asking, what do you see as the obstacles for technology acceptance and how do we overcome them?
I'll just speak directly to the camera at this point. Hey, Brent, if I could answer that, people, policy, and procedure. The other three P's that'll make it happen, I think, are private-public partnerships, cultural readiness. Certainly, we are in a new and inspired opportunity right here. The next number of months and years, people will be inspired in ways that they weren't before COVID, out of necessity. So get out of the tragedy. I think there's many great things that'll come forward, and feel free to reach out to me. I look forward to seeing if we can move the ball together. Brent's done some great work with CRR. Yep,
absolutely he has. So one just kind of final question for me as we're wrapping up here, and we've already been going for almost 45 minutes, which is epic. What would be a final message that you would leave to everyone listening to this live, as well as who are listening to this later after the fact? A message of a question, a challenge, any sort of final thoughts from you today?
Well, thanks, Kevin. I think the biggest thing is IoT, AI, AR, computer vision, biometrics, imagining an Ironman firefighter or law enforcement officer to serve those in the community. Let's do it. Let's do it right away. And to the brothers and sisters who are still out on the line, God bless.
Couldn't agree more. Well, Captain Kirk, this has been an absolute honor and a pleasure. Our first Darley virtual Smart Firefighting virtual chats. I think unless we get any other questions, you got any final thoughts? I think we're going to wrap this up here. But I just wanted to thank you and really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this today.
Oh, absolutely, Kevin. And you and your Darley team are great to work with. And I think we'll probably see you in a couple of weeks, see if we can get a couple other inspired souls on the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Captain, have a great rest of your day, and I'm sure I'll talk to you in 5 minutes or so.
And thanks to all the viewers for having the interest.
Take care, Captain.
Cheers.
See ya.